What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG on the YouTube.com. Down there, we like magic, you know by now. And today, I've got a deck that you've all been wanting to see for a minute now. You all voted on it. A lot of you voted for this one because there's a lot of potential. A lot of people are hyping how good this deck might be right now. Today, I'm going to bring you Grixis Dynavolt Tower. And this deck actually should be really familiar if you played a control deck in the past few months here since Kaladesh came out. It's really reminiscent of just Gearhulk control decks that use Torrential Gearhulk and a bunch of instants and not much else, you know. We play mostly on our opponent's turn, but this deck plays at least one sorcery speed card in the form of Dynavolt Tower, which we're playing a 3 of in this deck. A Dynavolt Tower can easily deal 9 to 12 or even 21 damage to your opponent over the course of the game, especially if you get multiples of them out. 2 Dynavolt Towers is no joke, and that's like enough to pick off like 4, 5, 6 small creatures over the course of the game pretty easily too. This thing can hit planeswalkers. Remember, you can always redirect non-combat damage from your opponent to a planeswalker they control, so you can take out Saheelis and Lilianas and sometimes Gideons and stuff with this. So Dynavolt Tower is no joke, and it has so much versatility, especially in a deck that is, again, basically a Torrential Gearhulk deck that wants to play 26 to 28 spells. And you can take advantage of all of those spells by also playing Dynavolt Tower. It's just a perfect fit for the deck. While we're on win conditions, I might as well tell you about the 4 copies of Torrential Gearhulk. You know, this is a pretty serious control deck, so we want to play all 4 copies of Torrential because he's really the best card in the entire deck, you know, which I don't have to explain too much at this point. You know, he's just, later on in the game, a huge, crazy threat, a 5 power, 6 toughness, that's no joke either, giant threat that allows you to basically kill one of their dudes or maybe counter one of their spells out of nowhere. Maybe you'll Glimmer of Genius off of this and get huge card advantage plus energy for your tower. So, like, just Torrential Gearhulk is just insane no matter basically what you're doing with him. And obviously this casts Unlicensed Disintegration very well because, hey, you've got an artifact, Torrential Gearhulk. So if you cast Unlicensed off of this, you'll always get the extra 3 damage. That's worth noting too. So pretty much anything you recast with Gearhulk will give you a ton of value and a 5/6. So you just got to play him. He's the best win condition for a deck like this, and really the entire reason to play a deck like this, period. But now I want to get into the meat and potatoes here because the rest of the deck is all spells. We're playing 28 spells in this deck, and there's only like 1 sorcery speed card in all of these. That's basically 27 instants. So we can play most of the deck on our opponent's turn. That's what we want to be doing. So let's start with some removal here because control decks love removal, and this one is no different. We're going to play 2 copies of Shock, 3 copies of Fatal Push, 4 copies of Harness Lightning, and 4 copies of Unlicensed Disintegration in the deck. Shock is just basically sort of to pay our respects to Cat Combo, you know. So, and it also can take out like everything from Toolcraft Exemplar to Tireless Tracker even in this format. So Shock, you can't devalue this card. It actually is very, very good right now against both creature-based strategies and especially Cat Combo. We need as many tools against that deck as we can get because we don't just want to like auto lose, you know, in the later turns. So we'll play 2 Shock, and the 3 Fatal Push are obviously very good against Mardu Vehicles decks, Jund Energy Aggro, there's some Humans decks running around in the format, Green-Black Counters even, you know, this kills snakes and stuff, Gifted Aetherborns even, so lots of targets for a Fatal Push that's not even revolted in this format, and I definitely think it's worth the 3 copies. Now, Harness Lightning is a great card in this deck, especially if we've got a tower out, because it basically gives it another mode, which is always great. We can Harness Lightning and not actually spend any of the energy on killing a creature and just funnel all 3 energy into the tower to hit the player in the face. That's pretty cool right there. And there's also a bunch of small creatures like we were just talking about a second ago. So sometimes you can always kill like a 1 or 2 toughness guy with a Harness Lightning and leave mana or energy over for your Dynavolt Tower. That's always a good play. And there's also worth noting on the opposite end of the spectrum, sometimes you'll have gotten a couple extra energy from casting spells with a Dynavolt in play, and when that happens, or maybe you played an Aether Hub, that happens too, sometimes Harness Lightning can take out a 4 or 5 toughness guy if we've got a couple energy laying around. And 4 Unlicensed Disintegration, which is one of the top 2 removal spells in the format. It's either Fatal Push or Unlicensed. And it's really the entire reason, besides Fatal Push, to play black in the deck. Note that Push and Unlicensed are the only cards main deck with black in the casting cost, and that's because they're just the best removal spells, period, right now. And there's definitely times where you don't even care. If you've got a tower in play, you don't care if you're going to get the extra 3 damage. Unlicensed is just basically, a murder. And that can be really good too. Against Cat Combo, this card is great as well. So just Unlicensed is one of the best cards in the whole format. I keep calling it one of the best removal pieces. This is probably one of the top 5 or 10 cards in the whole format, without a doubt. We are playing one more piece of removal in the deck, but I just couldn't fit a million things on the screen at one time. So let me go ahead and tell you about the one copy of Radiant Flames, and don't look at this as just a random one of, it looks that way, but it's really just a pre-sideboarded copy of Radiant Flames against things like Mardu vehicles especially, and other low-to-the-ground aggro decks in the format, because we can just blow them out. Especially in the early game, that's when we're looking for this, but even in the mid to late turns, this can be very, very good against those decks to sort of keep them from, having anything to crew their vehicles sometimes, or just taking care of all their small ground dudes. Against things like green-black counters, this can take out Snakes and Rishkars, Gifted Aetherborns, Tireless Trackers, lots of stuff against that deck. Against Mardu vehicles, Inventor's Apprentice, Toolcraft Exemplar, Thraben Inspector, Veteran Motorist, there's just so many good things that you can blow out and easily create 2-for-1s, or even 3 or 4-for-1s in the mid to late game. That Radiant Flames is worth playing a pre-sighted in copy, I think. Now, we also want to play some counter magic in this deck. It's important to do that in this format right now. It's, again, and we're mostly a draw-go deck. We draw a card, we say go. And so we want to play some counter magic because we're mostly playing on our opponent's turn. With that in mind, here's our counter suite. We're going to play 2 copies of Disallow, 2 copies of Void Shatter, and 2 copies of Negate. And it looks like a bunch of 2-ofs, but really what I've done there is split a play set of 3-mana counter spells between these 2 things here. Sometimes you'll want the Disallow to counter triggers and stuff like that, and then sometimes you'll want the Void Shatter to keep graveyard shenanigans from taking place. Things like Liliana, or Nissa Vital Force, or especially Scrap Heap Scrounger. You want to keep that off the battlefield. And Void Shatter can be very important. And they also perform very well in what is essentially a mirror match against Jeskai Saheeli combo. That's also, by the way, the whole reason why Negate is so great right now, or at least a big part of it, is that it can counter Saheeli Rai on turn if we're on the draw, which is super, super important. And Negate may even deserve another copy or even the full playset in the main. It's just hard to determine what to take out. But Negate is really important right now because not only can it counter that Saheeli, again, on the draw. You can't underestimate how good that is. But it can also counter Heart of Kiran if we're on the play, which is also a very, very relevant thing right now. It also counters Liliana, Gideon, Chandra, a bunch of stuff. I can keep going with Negate. It's just really good. But anyway, let's move into the last thing that control decks like to do, which is draw cards. And we've got a great suite of card draw right now available to us in blue. So let me take a look at it here with you. This is 4 copies of Anticipate and 4 copies of Glimmer of Genius. Now, Glimmer of Genius is just an absolute no-brainer and makes control what it is in some ways. Obviously Torrential Gearhulk is the best card in control decks right now, but Glimmer of Genius is probably in the top 3 as far as what makes control good. This is a great piece of card advantage for us that allows us to dig pretty far. 4 cards is very serious, and it's instant speed, great to recast with Torrential Gearhulk. This Glimmer of Genius is so incredibly good in any control deck, and once you've added Dynavolt Tower, it just becomes like exponentially even better. So definitely all 4 copies of Glimmer. Now Anticipate, you'll see 1 to 3 or 4 copies of this in some decks. I went with the entire 4 here. Now, how many Anticipates you play is one of the great debates in Grixis Tower right now, but I decided all 4 was the prudent idea because it allows us to cut at least 1 land. Anticipate is often just more copies of lands in the early to mid game, which can be really important for this deck, but it also allows you to slip in an extra play on turn 5. You'll counter a spell, Anticipate at the end of their turn, or you're on License Disintegration, Anticipate at the end of their turn. Maybe, on turn 5 you play Dynavolt on your turn, and then wait until the EOT on their turn to play your Anticipate, power your tower a little bit, draw into a Torrential or something. So there's just so many good ways to use Anticipate in this deck that I definitely felt like in this version it's worth the 4 of. Love the card. Now I'm playing 25 lands in my build of this deck, and that's probably the most controversial decision that you'll see in this video. A lot of people want to play 26 lands in this deck, and that's pretty traditional for most control decks. You play 26 to 28. In this deck we're trying to get to a 6-drop. So 26 lands, there's definitely a case for it. But we've got a lot that's relatively low on the curve for us in this deck. We've got a bunch of removal that'll help us get into the mid and late game. We've got 4 whole copies of Anticipate, which again are often extra copies of lands. We've got 4 Glimmer of Genius, which can help us get to that 5th or 6th land that we need to drop a Gearhulk. So I just think that we're relatively safe to play 25 lands, and I haven't seen too many problems, to be honest with you. The mana base isn't too shaky. We've got a bunch of duels plus Aether Hub, which stays powered for most of the game. So most of, our mana base here, the entire thing is colored except for Evolving Wilds, which allows us to go get the black or red mana that we might need at any given time. So pretty tuned mana base here. I don't feel it's quite necessary to play 26. And by the way, that means a lot coming from me because I am always a proponent of an extra land, but I just don't feel like this deck needs it. That said, missing a land drop is bad. Missing a land drop in control is often very, very bad. So, if you feel like you're just not into playing 25 lands, you could always add that last one and take out a Shock or an Anticipate. I've seen some decks that play the one main deck Shock, and I've seen a lot of 3 of Anticipates. So if you're a little more comfortable doing that, you always could, but I feel 25 lands is fine. Here's our sideboard right here. We're going to play 2 Ceremonious Rejection as an extra tool against Heart of Kiran and Aetherworks Marvel, for that matter, because it's starting to sneak back into Saheeli Ride decks. Transgress the Mind, this card just tears apart control decks, and you're not going to see a bunch of control decks outside of Jeskai Saheeli, but even, against those decks, Transgress is just great, and I'm surprised I don't see it in sideboards more often, because it just demolishes those Saheeli decks if you can play it on curve. Weaver of Lightning is very good against aggro, and I should probably play it in more sideboards. I know a lot of red players like this card a lot in their boards, and every time I've tried it, it's been very good, so I should probably do that more often. We're going to do another copy of Radiant Flames. I don't know how important it is to have a bunch of sweepers in the deck, especially sorcery speed sweepers. I think we've got an abundance of removal. We don't have to make room for a full play set of Flames or Henny's Expertise or anything like that. I think just one more Radiant Flames is fine. We're going to play 2 Kalitas against aggro, and especially against, if you run across that blue-red zombies deck that I just profiled the other day, Kalitas is a ridiculous bomb against that deck because it shuts them out of doing a lot of stuff they want to do. And finally, the weirdest choice in the entire deck, but hear me out, 1 copy of Flame Lash. Now, I just felt like we had an extra copy, or slot in the board, and you could play like Goblin Dark Dwellers, 1 or 2 even, in the board if you wanted to do that. But Flame Lash has been particularly good against Marty vehicles. This can sometimes take out a Heart of Kiran when you need it to in the late-ish to mid-game, and this can also be very good against a cat combo. It takes out either Saheeli or the cat. That's pretty cool. You can also recast this with Torrential Gearhulk to just smash them for 4 in the face and have a 5/6 on the board. I think there are definitely a fair amount of reasons to play at least 1 Flame Lash somewhere in the 75. Here are your power rankings right here. Overall, a score of 67 is pretty darn good, especially considering the budget. A lot of these, Marty vehicles, Saheeli combo, green-black counters, the top 3 decks right now are all going to cost like $350, $400, something like that. This costs just over $200. It's like $225 to build this deck, mostly because of the Kalitas in the board. If you wanted to take those out, you could put this deck at like $175 pretty easily. Now, the deck is fairly grindy, but it can be played like a control deck, which gives it a little bit more game against green-black counters than a lot of grindy decks would have. Green-black counters is like the king of grindy decks right now, and Jeskai Saheeli is right up there too, because it can just play control until it drops the combo on it and protects it with a negate or something. So both of those decks are fairly grindy and have great top end, either huge creatures you can't do anything about, or a combo that kills you in one shot. But this deck has definitely pieces against both of those decks. Green-black counters is probably our worst matchup, but we can still win that matchup if things go well for us, because green-black counters is fairly weak to control. So if we can play like a control deck, counter some key pieces, keep some smaller stuff off the board in the early game, we can grind it out and ultimately win that game with Torrential Gearhulk and maybe a tower or even 2 in play. But that's one of our harder matchups. Marty Vehicles and Saheeli Cat combo, we more or less have like at least 50% game against both of those decks. And against Cat combo, I feel like it increases to 55 or 60. So we've got decent game against pretty much everything right now. Try it out. Let me know how you feel. I know a lot of you are already playing a deck like this because you've told me in the comments section that you're piloting it and you want to know sort of what my take on it is. So any additional insight on your part would be really, really appreciated, because I know I got a lot of people playing this deck right now. But anyway, for now, I am tapped out. What are we doing next time, though? That's always the question. Well, it's budget deck time. We've had a couple of competitive ones in a row, and you also voted on this one. The third place deck in the, I guess we'll call it a competition, was Blue-White Fog. This is just only like a $20 or $25 deck right now, and this is super fun and very, very annoying. And a lot of people want to play like Bant Fog right now, but we don't even need those like green fog cards. We can do it all with just blue and white and like Consulate Surveillance and a couple other pieces. So this deck has been really, really fun, even though it's not the absolute best deck in the world. It is super fun, and it's really, really good on the budget. So stay tuned for that next time. For now, if you enjoyed the content, I advise you to like the content. Just hit the thumbs up, helps me out a lot. You can also sub if you're new. Hit the bell for the notifications, because that's how you know when I put videos out. Just do that. And I'll see you guys later. I'm Dev. This is Julie. You're actually awake. Hey, I thought you were asleep the whole time. She got her ears pinned back because I'm being all loud. So don't worry. We can relax in a second, Julie. Anyway, I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.